And we're live. What's up? Welcome to another live stream. Today we're going to discuss cloud skills. My name is Robin. I'm a cloud solution architect at NordCloud. And today we're joined by two legends, Tim and Mike. So if you have any questions, please let us know using the chat. Kev, you're up, mate.
I know. What can I say? So yeah, quick introduction for myself. Thank you for coming and tending to Streaming Clouds. I feel like we're going full circle because it just wasn't 6 months ago when Mike had me on his show, right? And I was doing like my first online interview, and now I'm interviewing Mike. So it's kind of surreal for me, but yeah.
6 months already? Can't believe it's been that long already.
Yeah, so yeah, we've obviously got Tim Warner as well. So round of applause to Tim as well. So if you don't know these two, obviously, if you don't know these two, they've contributed to your technical careers or technology careers in some way. I know they have for me and Robin, some way along our paths, especially with, we'll get onto the backgrounds of these two, you goats, basically. I know it's probably weird here saying it, but, if it wasn't for you guys pushing out the content and material and all the good stuff that you've done over the years, I don't think I know where I'd be now. So I just wanted to say thanks before we got started. But
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to talk about your tech careers, and we're going to, tech, stuff you're doing, Mike, as well. It's quite visionary. And then we've got Tim. Obviously, Tim's is joined the winning team at Microsoft, right? So we'll go into a little detail about that. But I also know he's collaborating with Mike as well on some awesome stuff. So we'll also discuss that. So we'll start off with Mr. Pfeiffer, if that's okay. We'll tell us how it started, Mike, where you've come from, what's being delivered now, and what's next.
How much time you got? No, I'm just joking.
Nope.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thanks for doing this, you guys. I'm just really happy to see you guys doing this. And thanks for being inviting us. I'm happy to be here. So yeah, I started in the 90s. I have a very similar story to a lot of people, like tech support, in the mid 90s. I started at AOL. It was my very first tech job. I had no idea what I was doing. Then I went to Gateway Computers, and then I really got the bug. I got MCSE certified, and I was like, I could really see myself doing this. So I kind of just got obsessed, and I started building PCs in my house, buying parts off eBay. It's learning Windows NT back in those days. I don't have any like cool child origin stories. We did have a computer in my house when I was a kid, but I didn't really know how to use it. It's just like surfing Prodigy internet back in those days before AOL existed. But I got my MCSE certification in the early or late 90s, 1999, I think, and that changed my career. And I spent 10 years working as an enterprise consultant, flying all over the place, all over the country, all over the world. I spent a lot of time doing Windows systems administration and some web development. I spent a lot of time doing Active Directory and enterprise type projects, a lot of Exchange migrations, a lot of Active Directory forest consolidation projects. And so anyways, I got in about 2012. I was working on Exchange. I could see Microsoft's push towards Office 365 at the time. And I was like, well, I better get in front of this cloud thing. And I started doing that. And then in 2013, went to AWS, left AWS in 2013, and started Cloud Skills, and been working with Tim a bunch along the way, doing all kinds of cool trainings and different stuff. But yeah, that's kind of my backstory, nothing fancy, just got a tech support job and worked my way up.
I started like that as well. Obviously, I wasn't like an enterprise consultant at whatever you were doing at that point, but starting off on the help desk.
To get into that.
Yeah, too right. Yeah, and starting off on the help desk, the service desk. I think we all remember when we had to reset our first password in Active Directory. It's that feeling of power. Yes.
Totally. And even back then for me, I know I've talked to Tim about it too in the past, but just like building all the machines and networking together, man, just learned so much about infrastructure in those days, and it really served me. And I was just talking to somebody this morning that's got a big SQL Server background, and we were just talking about how hard it must be to not go through that infrastructure climb. It's very challenging not to have that kind of background. So I feel grateful that I was in that position.
Yeah, it's difficult now to abstract the back end, if that makes sense. So you use your cloud service provider, whatever, and most of it's taken care of. Yeah, even like the virtual machine component, it's just presented to you as an object, right? Something to connect to. Whereas back in the day, you'd be raiding those disks. I remember my first RAID array. It was a steep learning curve, put it that way. And it was like SCSI. So it was before SATA and all that. And, going through the whole stack and learning how to set up a server was just like, and you just find these old secondhand books, right? That would sort of steer you in the right direction. That's yeah, I had a similar background to that.
I know Tim was writing those books back then. Tim had wasn't it right, Tim? He had a Windows NT book back in the 90s, didn't he?
Yeah, that's you're all just bringing back so many memories. I also want to thank you, Robin, Kevin, Mike. Good to see you again. All of you who are joining, thanks for being here. Yeah, this is quite a reminiscence for sure. My career is about the same vintage as Mike. I earned my MCSE and I think it was 99 as well. But I guess to sum up my career, and then I'll address the specific question. Looking back on it, I was always into computers and technology and always into teaching from early days. And that means a lot. And that's really a kernel message I'd like to bring to our discussion today of finding where your passion is and where your aptitude is and where they meet. Boy, that's where real magic happens. But I didn't know that at the time, and I wound up going to school originally I'd hoped that I'd become a family practice physician, so I thought I should major in biology. Wow. Turns out I'm not that great. I love hard sciences, but I wasn't that great at it because I wasn't in that spot where my passion and aptitude meet. So I wound up barely not getting into med school, which was really crushing at the time. And long story short, I wound up looking for a job, wondering what the heck I was going to do next. And I figured, well, I always loved computer stuff, so I worked at a mom and pop PC shop as a bench repair technician, and just poking along, not thinking of that as a career path. And somebody came in with their computer to do a repair, and I'm working with them, and he's like, you know something? You might be a good fit for what I do. I said, what do you do? He said, I teach people how to you do computer software and repair and all that. And that was my shift from just a job into a career. And it sprung forward from there over the years. I love the cloud because it's a lot easier to keep the industry in mind. You know, as a tech trainer, there's always the hazard of getting too far away from what's really happening in industry. And frankly, for the first 12, 15 years of my career, that was a real big challenge because, to Mike's point, the physical infrastructure, being physically present in data centers and offices, is a pretty big commitment, time, career. And then on the other hand, if you also love to teach and write and that kind of stuff, there's a push pull. And that's what my career for a lot of it has been, going between industry or teaching and having a hard time finding a balance. I don't know how many years ago, 8, maybe 7, in my work at Pluralsight, I got involved in Azure, and that's where I really found a home in cloud computing and in Microsoft Azure specifically, where you can do industry work and teach and write all from the comfort of your home in your pajamas. I mean, what better situation is that? So that's the nutshell career. To answer the question about writing books, my first published book was in 2000, and it was on Windows NT certification. And it's just such a Murphy's Law situation because literally within the first 2 weeks of this book being published, and you know, the proudness, it's undeniably such a great feeling to see your book listed on Amazon or even better on a shelf in a store. But within 2 weeks of publication, Microsoft announced Windows 2000 Server, and they were going to get rid of all the NT certs. So my first book, became obsolete within the first month. So I should have learned my lesson then, to be honest, but I've continued writing in the next couple of decades, even though honestly in 2022, what I do at Microsoft now, I say just go to Microsoft Docs, for the most part. Seriously.
I'd
Isn't
forgotten
that the
about that
truth?
detail, man, about the went out of date right away. Jeez. That's tough because back then it was easier to create content that didn't die in 6 months, But
The
very
industry
hard
is
challenge
moving.
to create content.
The industry is moving at a unbelievable pace, right? So if you have something in print, you're rewriting and reprinting all the time because I was working on something and I wrote down everything, and suddenly IPv6 is supported, like out of the blue. You're like, whoa, what happened now? So it wasn't Azure, it's another cloud, GCP. But I want to touch a little bit on what Kevin just mentioned, and I think that we all share is like how we build up our career, and we by being exposed to all these fundamental technical skills like compute, networking, storage, identity. Like Mike, I know you're an advocate of this as well. That all these you have a couple of pillars that are basically the foundation of whatever we do these days. So that's something I want to touch upon. See what we can get out of that, because I have the feeling that not enough people are focused on the basics and are suffering from shiny object syndrome, something like, ooh, serverless, right? But and then, right, do you understand what's going on underneath? Are you able to troubleshoot? Right. So how would you approach this as somebody who's ramping up his cloud skills? Tim.
Go for it, Mike or Tim.
Doesn't matter. How about Mr. Cloud Skills himself? Mike,
All
what's
right,
up?
cool. We're crossing the streams a little bit on that one, but it's all good. So it's a really interesting challenge, right? We kind of mentioned it. Like if you didn't have an old school infrastructure experience, it's really hard to recreate that now. It's also very easy, like you mentioned, shiny object syndrome. And hey, I'm going to jump right into Kubernetes, but I don't really know much about containers, and that's kind of important detail, right? So, I think that ultimately my solution is it's always been challenged, right? Hands-on, 100,000%. I can't say it anymore. When I got my NT4 MCSE, like I said, I was buying parts off eBay and building white box machines and networking them all. You obviously don't do that in the cloud, but there's ways to kind of emulate stepping your way through. And I've recently started a new YouTube channel, and doing a bunch of stuff over to INE2, building labs where people can follow along. And that's what I think. I think the best way is like really get in there, roll up your sleeves, and face the truth of maybe not knowing something, right? And if you never did networking, taking the time to spend on doing really basic network stuff, like how do I subnet IP version 4 addresses, and how do I design the networks, and how do I really understand what's going on. And I think that you can only read so many books and watch so many videos before you hit a ceiling in your learning. And so, yeah, interacting with and engaging more in those items. And Microsoft Learn is a great place to go into the fundamental certification, EZ 104, or administrator certification in content, and start poking around in there. But I think the challenge on all of us, like creating content, is going to be to give people more tactical, hands-on type of projects to do to really get them over the hump. So that's what I would say, and find interesting ways to do what you were already doing. Like if you're not doing cloud, you're working on-prem, figure out how to do that in the cloud. And those could be your project ideas. And I have more to share there, but that's kind of like me shooting from the hip. I'd love to hear what Tim says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to extend on what you said, Mike, and take a step back, kind of a macro step back, because when I think of the state of IT and being an IT professional in 1999 or 2000, and just how vastly different it is now today, especially with cloud computing, what I would say is kind of a warning is, if you're of the mind, I want to get into cloud computing as my career because it's a lot of money, I would really ask you to second guess your motivations. I really want to just transmit some ground level experience and some suggestions. I recommend people who are interested to coming to IT to do a self inventory and really think about the things that give you joy. I don't mean to get too philosophical here, but the bottom line is, in cloud computing, the landscape is changing so often. You have to stay up. It's like a swiftly moving stream or a fast conveyor belt. You have to go into it with an eternal student mindset, because the landscape is constantly changing. And I personally can't imagine investing that kind of time and effort if I didn't genuinely enjoy the work. You know what I mean? So I just want to put that as an initial line in the sand. Now, given that there's so much to cloud computing, there's different cloud providers. When you get under the covers, you'll find that they're really a lot more similar than they are different. I'm thinking of Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. But the job roles underneath there, think of administration, think of security and compliance, think of development, think of architecture, it goes on from there. How do you know what color your proverbial parachute is? Some good ideas that roll off the top of my head are, Mike mentioned YouTube, but if you're willing to do a free trial or pay for a subscription, there's training providers like Pluralsight. There's INE, obviously. Any of these reputable training providers where you can literally just sample and dip in to these different roles. Now, speaking from the Microsoft community standpoint, I can attest that the Microsoft tech community is really warm, inclusive, giving, and helpful. So that would be not only a great spot to ask people as you meet them, tell me about this kind of work, and run that against your own passions, interests, and aptitudes. But also, I found in my career, another huge theme is professional networking. The vast majority of the positions I've had in my career, full-time and contract, have been not through searching the classifieds and applying, although I have done that before. It's through professional networking. So as you immerse yourself in the Microsoft community, that could be tech conferences, user groups, activation, work on Twitter and LinkedIn, you'll come to mind when a position comes open. And in my opinion, the most important position is the first one. because chances are you're facing the chicken and egg situation. I need experience for this job role, but I don't yet have experience, so you're kind of stuck. Once you get that first break, now you do have experience, and you should find that your career begins to develop more and more momentum over time.
Some absolute gold there, Tim. Like so many, so many. Some really good advice there, especially like you said, the networking as well. So, I struggle with this now, not on the networking side, but I wanted to know everything in the cloud. And you're right, you need to focus on what you've got passion for. And there's so many different career paths that trying to figure that out in the first instance is like an achievement in itself. Do I, yeah, like you said, want to be a DevOps engineer, a developer in security, etc. But then, even the networking piece, if I thought back to, similar to like Robin as well and you guys, if there was user groups 20 years ago and you could have just turned up and start listening to content, right, or watching demos or meeting like-minded professionals, how much value that would give to you, starting out in your career. So I think that's some really good advice there.
Yeah, and then what happens sometimes with that is like you meet people and then it starts helping you answer questions, right? Because you're trying to figure this out, and it's like, oh, the stuff that was not in the book, I got that from this relationship. But sometimes what happens is what's happening to you two, which is you go even further, and then you meet. You guys don't work together, right? You guys met in the communities, right? And now you're starting your own show. And now you're taking what you're learning and teaching it back. To mention that too, like the power of teaching back what you're learning. I love it, man. I think that the professional networking is something that I would not dismiss as an awesome option for you. Because like Tim said, most of my positions after I got started in the beginning have been relationships. People that know who I am and what I've done, or I met them somewhere, I met them in the community. I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't start with the PowerShell user group in Phoenix. I got into that with a guy named Jason Helnick, who is a program manager on the PowerShell team, but this is a long time before that. And we just lived here in Phoenix, and he's like, I'm starting a user group. You like PowerShell and you're blogging, want to help me? And we started a user group, and I met so many people in that, and that changed my career. I started writing books after that, and on and on and on. So I don't even think I would have ended up working at Microsoft or Amazon had I not doubled down on that community stuff.
Awesome. I love this. These defining moments in your career. And most of them are community based or giving back, finding your passion. It sounds so easy, right? It's not. Later we'll touch upon like burnout as well, because that's something that comes with being passionate about your work, not letting go, trying to find balance, etc. I do like to take a question from the audience. Previous colleague of mine, Dave. Dave, good to see you. He says, I agree that having been involved with the basics is still certainly helpful. They've got a long history as well. But what do you guys think about the statement? Technology will become truly powerful when it isn't visible anymore.
Yeah,
Mike,
I mean, the first thing that I think of when that pops up is I think about service mesh and the whole cloud native world. I mean, can you imagine trying to track every IP address for every service and a Kubernetes cluster and like have to map that to DNS and all that stuff, figure out certificates and encrypting the communication? That's an example of a technology to me that is awesome when you don't really know what's going on, because that's not the focus. The focus is adding value to the application that flows down to end users. However, that can send you into a really challenging troubleshooting situation, right? So, I think it depends on the scenario and also what your responsibilities are as a practitioner, right? If you're responsible for the technology and you don't know how it works, you're going to be in trouble. So, I kind of agree with the comment, but I think it depends on where you're sitting.
Yeah, I think from my seat, I haven't had enough espresso yet to really process that quote. I think it's deeper than my brain cells can go. But the first thing couple things I think about is we're kind of there in many regards. I mean, what is cloud computing? That's the whole metaphor of the cloud. I look up at the sky, I see a sky full of clouds. I don't know what's on the other side. It could be the International Space Station happens to be behind the cloud, or a passing plane that I didn't hear, or whatever, you know. and I'll never get within kilometers of those data centers. I was at the grocery store earlier. The cashier was wearing an Apple Watch. She probably has no real idea, maybe she does, I don't know, of all of the tech that goes into what that watch is doing in terms of health telemetry and geolocation and all of that. So it seems like we kind of are there. But like Mike said, somebody needs to know how to develop those capabilities, that hardware and that software, and that could be you.
Yeah, good points. Because I'm trying to wrap my head around it as well. I know Dave, and he does this sometimes. You're like, what is it you're actually saying? But there's some value in there as well around like serverless, for example, right? Because that's like a layer of abstraction, and you have all this basically data center compute networking storage going underneath it, and all you do as a operator or as a developer is just push your code. Platform will figure out the rest, and then you'll add value in a pretty fast, easy way, right? But then again, if you don't know what's happening under the hood, and suddenly you have to add or like what SSL or something's not working or something's not performing or you have your cold start, so you still have to understand what's going on, right? So it's yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I
It's
imagine that.
Gigo.
Yeah, and I imagine that would come up a lot, right? When you're dealing with somebody that's stuck in the old ways of doing stuff, where they're like, just not the way we've been doing it for 10 years or something like that. And so that could come up, right? But
it's dangerous talk, that, Mike, isn't it? We've always done it that way.
Yeah, that's like the dangerous quote, right? It's like,
all right. Another one, maybe this one is a little bit more straightforward, as in, hi everyone, do you think there are enough cloud roles and demand to specialize in Azure cloud networking?
Well,
Tim?
I mean, it's fundamentally it's a subjective question. Are there enough cloud roles? I personally come from an abundance mentality. I'd like to think there's enough room for everybody. I mean, I don't know. I mean, what I'm looking at right now on my monitor is I have the Browse All Certifications page in the Microsoft Docs up that has a library of I don't know how many dozen different job roles that Microsoft defines in their ecosystem. You could find a similar list of job roles in the other cloud providers, or if you go to an IT career site, I'm sure you could find an index of roles there. Are there enough roles? Yeah, but which one or ones are for you, I think would be the more salient question, which kind of recurses back to our earlier thoughts about what really you're good at and what you're interested in personally, you know?
cool. Yeah, one thing that I would say, I don't know either, but I would imagine that the engineering skills that you build to support the network need to be leveraged somewhere else in the business, unless you're working at a huge place where people are just kind of like very specialized. And I've seen that, like, national and international companies are huge, right? Sometimes the network guy, all he does is ACLs. Like, oh, I'm going to open that port because a ticket came in. I'm going to close that port because a ticket came in. You know what I mean? So you might be able to specialize like that level, and that might be what you want to do. I don't know. But I do know that there's a lot of, that in a huge enterprises, right? Of just being very specific and dialed into what you're doing. But at a smaller place, if you've got engineering skills, you're going to be, I think, using your skills in a lot more ways than networking. But yeah, I mean, with all the hybrid cloud stuff that's going to be happening over the next several years, there's going to be a lot of need for people that know networking really well. So that might be a space where you could get some leverage as a networking person, is coming into more of those hybrid cloud engineer roles, because that, it's always tricky to get the networking figured out there.
Like that's really brilliant, because I think about here where I live in Nashville, Tennessee in the States, and we have a lot of big healthcare conglomerate type of companies. So it seems like a lot of my friends here who work in IT are so incredibly siloed, where they do this little bit of IT. And unfortunately, in some of these businesses, the corporate culture is you stay out of my area and I stay out of yours. So there's opacity, there's not really visibility. And again, what are you interested in? What do you want out of IT? I can't imagine working in an environment where I'm that constrained and that siloed. I'm a generalist. I love to expand and all that. And to Mike's point, you're much more likely to find a more fluid job role with a small to medium size organization rather than a huge sprawling enterprise. And so, therefore, and especially with cloud, you may find that the company doesn't know enough to really have a job role title in mind. So it is fluid. And you may wear several hats in your position. And if you're like me, you'll love that. I love those kinds of challenges myself.
That's a great
Couldn't
point.
agree. Yeah, couldn't agree more, Tim. I mean, I've had lots of generalist roles, right? It means I've been able to touch all the domains, as I like to call it, right, in infrastructure. And I think that's just powered my career without me even knowing about it at the time, because I hate to be siloed. But just coming back to the networking scenario, I can tell you from experience, right? The cloud is crying out for networking people, but it's the next evolution of networking people. So you just won't be, switches, routers, and all that good stuff. We'll be talking, next generation firewalls or cloud native firewalls. We're talking load balancers. We're talking global DNS routing. So your scope's going to go from that to that, and that's only going to be good for you, right? And I think that's what Tim was getting at. You're just not going to be concentrating on, you don't make network cables anymore, do you?
It's too bad.
True. Too bad. Yeah.
The curmudgeon part of me kind of winces when I talk to somebody who's coming into IT and they're going right to cloud, and they missed all that, to Mike's original point about physically working with networking hardware. Yeah, because how do you visualize? Because the cloud is all about abstraction. How can you visualize this stuff if you don't have some context? It's obviously possible, but boy, am I grateful that I've got that experience of working with networking hardware and software right up close and personal before getting into the abstraction of the cloud.
And then there's also some like unlearning too, right? You have that different domains, but that's a big one, the networking, because there's stuff in cloud networking that's referring to old school networking that doesn't really work the way it used to, right? So if you're old school, you got to unlearn that, and if you're new, you're like, what the heck is this thing? So it's a very hard challenge. But yeah, a lot of good comments I'm seeing go by in the chat, and people throwing in their 2 cents. But yeah, networking skills will not fail you as a cloud engineer. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, the infrastructure is already there, right? So you're not dragging around with cables and all that stuff, and you have like these global backbones that you can leverage while building solutions. And then you have to think about CDN and think about integrity with databases, consistency. That's the one, by the way, not integrity, but consistency. All these other things that comes with higher amounts of latency and all that stuff. So I think especially in enterprises, there will be room, I guess, for the network specialization. But I think that networking generally is a good skill to have, at least to a certain degree. All right. Another one, and I think that we'll touch on something that we would like to know from Tim as well. About the new Microsoft security exams. They added a couple. That's the SC family instead of the AC 500. And that ties into this question as well from Alden. So thank you, Alden. How do you see security and the skills associated evolving as the public cloud platforms add more native security? Tim, go ahead, man.
Okay, yeah. In general, when you think of any public cloud provider, I think of what's called the shared responsibility model. There's knowing what you as a customer are responsible for implementing in your cloud solutions, and then what you can rely on the provider to do. And securing your infrastructure is a good example of that, because the provider is going to give you the tools, but it's up to you to A, be aware of what they are, and B, how to use them, how to implement them. So specifically in the Microsoft area, in Azure and Microsoft Cloud Platform, there's this range of job roles and associated certifications. The exams all have the SC prefix for security and compliance, I presume. And when Kevin and I last chatted, he mentioned these exams. And at the time, they really hadn't been on my radar. I do have the Microsoft Azure Security Engineer credential. That's an associate level cert that's really nice. It's general information security and Azure specifically. But the SCs are cool. I've since certified with it's one of the associate ones, Security Operations Analyst Associate. Yeah, I took that exam in the last week, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that the coverage was really nice because what it does is it makes sure that you understand what the tools are, not just in Azure AD, but also in Microsoft 365. And don't
Nice.
forget about Microsoft Sentinel. So it wraps those up really nicely, I found. In fact, right now I'm studying for the Identity and Access Administrator Associate. That one is much more focused on Azure AD Premium with conditional access and those tools. So, of course, I'm a clear proponent of certification. You may not in your career have a choice. Maybe you have to get certified, but especially if you're fortunate enough to have an employer who can sponsor you, if nothing else, look at these certifications as an excuse to dive deeper into these tools so that you'll know what they are and know when and how to use them when the occasion arises.
I think you touched on something really good there, Tim. Like, I started off with the AZ500, and it was quite broad. And I actually thought to myself, Microsoft should come up with their own certification path on security, because all those individual services that you've just mentioned there and those domains started off small. And like we were saying, I think there is enough work to be going around, right, for people. These things are just growing and getting bigger, and now you can specialize in the identity piece or another tool set to do with security, or Sentinel, etc. So it's great for those folks that are taking that cybersecurity path, but trying to get into the cloud as well.
It's such a huge space because it almost starts to bleed in a little bit of a way, depending on the company you go to. Of like, some people consider the governance stuff and the policy and all that kind of stuff, like security engineering, and then there's like penetration testing and all that other kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that most people in the cloud engineering space are going to have a lot of security skills in the future, are going to be required to, because just of what's happening in the world. We're going to digital warfare now. And I even talked to somebody recently that's going to be on the Cloud Skills FM podcast in several weeks, that created a startup just for supply chain security. That's all they're going to do. They're going to specialize in that one thing. And that's how big of a problem it is. So yeah, I think, I love that you guys brought up these core domains of technology, compute, networking, storage, security. These are, security is probably, to me, the hotter opportunity than the networking stuff we were talking about a second ago. I know people that are working at big places that are in charge of cloud security and trying to hire, and it's just hard to find enough people right now. So massive opportunity in the security space for sure.
Yeah,
Cool.
and even these tools we just talked about, Azure Sentinel or the other tools, and Google has one as well. These tie into different clouds as well. So it's not just your single cloud platform, but you can tie them to different cloud platforms, tie them back to on premises, and then suddenly you have this tool that's trying to rule like your whole security landscape, right? And security and compliance, they usually go hand in hand when somebody talks about it, but they're two completely different things, right? You have security as in hardening and making sure that everything's secure, and then you have compliance, making sure that your data is secure, that you're following the rules. You have all these compliancy rules, etc. So it's even there's a lot of room for specialization as well. Because
true.
what Mike already mentioned, assume the worst, assume like a catastrophic event. How are you going to recover from that? So you always have to make sure your data is secure, and all that stuff comes with compliancy as well. So that's interesting, really interesting. All right, I do have another question. I think it's an interesting one. Is DevOps all about cloud? Fine.
It's a great name, Isabel. That's my daughter's name. Spells it the exact same way. Thanks, Isabel, for the
Awesome.
question. I don't know. Is DevOps all about cloud? I would say DevOps patterns and practices and tools and services that have emerged over the last several years are influencing the way that we do cloud. But I also think that the word means many different things and many different people. So, I think that the way that we're building and releasing and running applications obviously has massively changed. And if we're calling that DevOps or SRE or whatever, um, kind of depends on who you talk to. But yeah, I mean, it's a new world of engineering, and that's kind of how I see it. Modern day engineering involves things like understanding open source, working with GitHub and understanding how to like collaborate on code and understanding how to make sure that stuff gets deployed through automated solutions or CI/CD pipelines and things like that. That seems like all software developer stuff, but it's really stuff any engineer in cloud is going to be dealing with if they're not already, right? Do you guys see that at like what you're working on?
Kev?
All the time. That's the thing that that I suppose that's probably one of the biggest requirements of many of my customers that I have engagements with is teaching those DevOps skills, right? Because like you said, Mike, it means so many things to different people, right? And it's interpreted in so many different ways. And it's from culture to tool set. It's from, on-premise to cloud, using cloud native technologies and everything in between. And it's a new type of skill, right? Bringing the infrastructure people on to that developer hybrid to deploy infrastructure, no matter what it is and what platform it is.
Yeah, I do think the cloud makes it easier because everything has an interface, right? It's programmable. So most applications hopefully are containerized. So this makes your DevOps way of working much easier than trying to bootstrap like existing virtual machines with golden images and all that stuff. It's still possible. You can still do it with the DevOps approach, but cloud native, and that's like solutions born in the cloud that have all these characteristics are definitely suitable for DevOps. So yeah, it's a good question. Tim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the question is DevOps the cloud? The answer is no. Next question. No, just kidding. No, what I would say is for starting out, I like the Microsoft definition of DevOps, the union of people, process, and technology to continually provide value to customers. I think that wraps up a whole lot. People, process, and technologies doesn't require the cloud. If a business cannot use a public cloud provider, they can absolutely set up all the things that Mike mentioned, the culture of experimentation, CI/CD automation, source code control, Agile, Scrum, some kind of development methodology. You can do all that on premises, of course. And there's tools for that, like Azure DevOps has an on-premises version. GitHub has an on-premises version. I think Robin, you mentioned it. The cloud gives you huge convenience because you've got these internet accessible endpoints that are reachable from anywhere on the globe and potentially beyond. You have a virtually unlimited army of build servers at your disposal where you don't have to care and feed these cattle in your own data centers. So the cloud certainly offers convenience for DevOps, but no, it's not a requirement, in my opinion.
Good point. Yeah. Even though I said something else, I do agree with you, Tim.
That shows how good of a listener I am. Thank you very much.
It makes it easier, but it's not necessary. So yeah, love that explanation. Thank you.
And you had the laugh track earlier. You could get the buzzer, like when somebody answers a question, you could buzz if you don't like the answer.
See, I do have some buttons, but the thing is that I don't hear it because it's going through my audio. So I can just hit a button now, and then everybody hears it exactly.
He waits for my reaction basically on the camera to see if it's come through.
Yeah, well, I can have this one, right? Oh well. All right. I have a couple more things we want to touch on. I do have to look at the time though, because we have like 70 minutes left. I don't know if Mike and Tim have to have other engagements after this. So we'll try to watch the clock. Let's see. I think we already touched on this, but I think it's good to revisit this. Now, what would your advice be to young professionals who have yet to find their area of interest? So.
I'll chime in real quick. I know Tim kind of spoke to this earlier and had awesome advice. To add on to that, I would just say more experimentation, and eventually you'll find that thing you're passionate about and have aptitude for, like Tim was talking about. I'm a big believer in it takes a lot of, trying it on to see if you like how it fits. You know what I mean? Just like going to the store and shopping for clothes. You don't know if you're going to want that shirt until you tried it on, right? So yeah, just try stuff on. And I think that's what happened to me, right? I was like, I had no idea I was going to become obsessed with computers. I had no clue. Like, I thought you see my instruments over here. I thought I was going to be a rock star. I would have learned the lesson later that wasn't going to happen. But, I had no clue. And what happened for me is I started building machines and getting them to talk to each other and realizing that I could like make stuff happen with it. And that for me in that time in my career, that was the trigger, So anyways, I think just going on what Tim said, experimenting and figuring out, if you just sit there, you're never going to find it, right? So get in the game. That's why I always say that.
Mike, it's something that you teach me. Oh, sorry, Tim. I'll wrap this up really quick. Mike, that's something you teach me and probably Kev as well, because we're the same group, and that's trying to embrace a scientific mindset, and that comes with experimentation, trying to see if you like something, see if it's working. Otherwise, just let go of it and move on, right? And I think that all the experience that you get out of that experimentation will help you in the long run anyway. So if you go for the networking path, but you decide, well, this is not for me, you probably learned enough of the basics to take that to something else, right? And this way, you will probably build like a complete skill set that probably will serve you well. So sorry, Tim. Go ahead, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add to that a recommendation for rigorous self-honesty. And what I mean by that is, I think back to when I was in college, like I said at the beginning of our discussion, I had a lot of passion about becoming a family practice physician. I was really on fire. But in retrospect, I really didn't have the proper aptitude. And it showed. I didn't get into med school, and to this day, I don't regret it. It's fine. And on the other hand, I've always had aptitude for music, like Mike. I've played guitar for a long, long time, and I'm good at it, but I don't have the passion or interest to be like my friends here in Nashville. It seems like almost everybody is looking to be a musical star of some type. So it's a question of having a balance between both interest and aptitude. I know that the years I was at Pluralsight, I coached a lot of folks who wanted to be Pluralsight authors. And sometimes there'd be a hard discussion when a person had interest in teaching, but look at the screen test, the audition results and all that. It's not in their wheelhouse. And I think it's really important to just have some humility and honesty about that. I'm not really good at this, but this other stuff over here I'm interested in, I am good at. And then there's always the question, can you develop aptitude? Yes, that's another option as well. Maybe I've got a lot of passion about this, about being a developer, let's say. I've never really been great at math, but maybe I can overcome that by asking a lot of questions and working, and that's absolutely doable. I've seen that happen many, many times indeed.
That's a really great tip, because it is very easy to miss that. And the other thing that kind of ties both of what you guys said that I just wanted to touch on is that when you are experimenting, one of the things that's going to happen is failure. And don't beat yourself up over it. It's just an experiment. Take the data as it is, look at it without judgment, and be like, all right, should I keep doing this or not? It's just really interesting, right? Like, because to tell you, test all this stuff until you find something you're passionate about, but you will inevitably hit the wall somewhere and have to struggle in any of those, whatever you do, right? So it's a really tricky way to describe it, or thing to describe, but it's like, there will be struggle no matter what. But you will find something where it's just like, that you're just going to keep coming back and doing it. I don't know. Have you guys gone through that? I know I went through that with like PowerShell back in the day. I was just like, man, this is hard, but like I'm obsessed with figuring this out. You know what I mean? And I would just do it all the time. And sometimes it was hard, and it was, get so hard I didn't want to do it anymore. But like there was something else that was the passion. You know what I mean? Just really interesting, hard to describe. But I think the experimenting and getting in the game will help you figure that out. At least it works for me. That's how I do it.
It is relatable because like 2 years ago, I started like, oh, I'm going to do software engineering, not as a software engineer, but I want to know what it's about. I want to understand what software engineers do. So I'll start with that. I started with Python, then I started messing around with Golang, and man, programming is hard. Understanding all these
Yeah.
concepts, what is going on, all these different libraries, and the syntax alone will can drive you crazy. So it's and a lot of times we're like, okay, I'll just give up, right? But I keep going back at it, revisit the course, reread a certain chapter of a book, trying to get different perspectives on these same concepts, and then suddenly it clicks, right? Then it's not one thing you hear, it's multiple things, multiple perspectives, and then suddenly the puzzle just, yeah, how you say that, comes together, whatever, right? And I think that's also important. And I think this ties into one of the questions and one of the topics that we want to tie in as well, and it's blended learning. Because I know that, well, Mike, Tim, you both are legendary trainers, and I think you're both advocates of like blended learning, right? And we already touched upon it, as in, okay, trying to get hands on as well. So, what can we share about how to learn how to accumulate all this knowledge, and trying to build out your skills, because knowledge alone is not a skill, right?
Yeah, I'll let Tim take that one, and I'll jump in after.
Yeah, again, it comes back to me anyway. It comes back to self reflection, this time thinking about how do I learn the best, most efficiently. Some people are more visual, other people are more experiential, hands on. With blended learning, I think of live online, kind of like what we're doing here, where you do have the direct feedback from peers and the instructor, or the pre-recorded, like a Pluralsight or an INE recorded course, where you're just watching and absorbing the playback. Some people, it's good to know. In fact, I'd say it's imperative for you to know what works for you and then lean into that. Maybe you're into books and written stuff and Microsoft Docs rather than books, probably, if you're doing Microsoft Cloud anyway. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Know your learning style and then dive in accordingly.
Yeah, and what I would say to that is just kind of the stuff Tim and I have been doing over the last several years. We cloud skills. We were doing a lot of blended learning, which was live stuff like Tim mentioned, but also after a live lecture, sending people into other projects that they could follow along with on their own. The other thing that I think of in blended learning is stuff I used to do back in the old days in instructor-led training, ILT, where you would go to like a traditional classroom. I know Tim used to teach a lot of those, and I did too. And back in the day, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when I was teaching more infrastructure stuff, or even as a student going into a place here in Phoenix where I ended up being a teacher, they would have racks of servers, right? And you would team up and you would go and like work on the infrastructure together. So from blended learning perspective, I also think of that like hackathons and teaming up with a bunch of people, in socializing the learning, because you're doing it at work anyways, and that's part of the learning process. Is how do I communicate with everybody on the team, right? And that's more important now than ever, because back when I started and Tim started, we could do everything by ourselves. Like Mike's the computer guy and Tim's the computer guy. It's not like that anymore. So yeah, I think from a blended perspective, you got to think about serving students where they can watch video while they're by themselves. You're traveling or whatever, you're working offline. There needs to be hands-on, right, where they can go into a sandbox and do stuff. And then they need social support. They need to be able to bounce questions off somebody. And it might need to be an instructor. It might just need to be another engineer that they're going through the content with. So that's what I'm trying to work on, and continue to extend that, what we're doing at Cloud Skills over at INE. And I don't want to be a big commercial here, but things that Tim and I are working on over there are very relevant to the conversation today. Core skills, core engineering skills, blended hands-on experience. So that's how I see it. And I think it's going to get really interesting over the next couple of years, because there's so many new things coming out and new ways to learn. It's going to be really wild, I think.
That's what sort of leads us on to our next conversation was the Jake and Elwood blues setup that you two have got, right? You're both musicians as well, which helps. But obviously, you've got that long-term partnership, right? And when you two are on board, like the gold that comes out is just unbelievable, right? And like you said, you take all that experience from the real world, like you were doing it as jobs, or you were learning, by yourself, or you were instructing in the classroom, and all these different like points of view, and that's what really executes a great learning path and delivery. And I know, Mike, you with I&E now, and you've got some real good value added hands-on lab building platform that you're developing at the moment, or I believe it's live, right, from an Azure point of view. Is that right?
Yeah, so interesting thing going on. Tim's doing live stuff, and I just wanted to back up for a second and just recognize how much value Tim added to the Cloud Skills brand over the years. We did do a lot of like Blues Brothers type of stuff, and like Cloud Skills would have never got as big as it did, even though we had tons of other trainers, if it wasn't for the stuff that I did with Tim. So massive, I don't know, just a lot of reverence for that experience. And I'm happy that we're bringing it forward into, absolutely, into I&E, because Tim's doing live stuff. He works at Microsoft, so he can't, teach all the time, but I could steal some of his time every once in a while when he's not working. So he's coming over and doing live stuff. I'm doing pre-recorded stuff. And, we've got a real big challenge of building these labs because, let's face it, like it's not easy trying to cover multiple cloud platforms, trying to think about all the side corner cases that could go wrong when you cut somebody loose into a lab. We have a huge hill to climb. However, we have a pretty audacious set of certifications that we're going to build as well. And so just imagine being able to do something like a CCIE or the Microsoft Certified Master back in the day for multiple clouds. So it's we have a long road, but I think that's what the industry needs. The industry needs advanced training, and that's what I'm trying to work on at I&E, and Tim's helping with that. So keep an eye on what we're doing. We're making announcements all the time. Tim's got another boot camp coming out next month. I'm working on core engineering content as well. So yeah, it's a lot, but we'll see where it goes, man. I really believe in the hands-on thing. I really do.
Tim, what's the boot camp? Can you say? Is it under NDA? Have you got any news about it? What's going on?
Yeah, no. It's as far as I know, it's public, right, Mike?
Yeah, it's public. I don't think it's been put on the website yet, but we could definitely talk about it.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a 6-class boot camp that's being stretched across a few months. We did session 1 of 6, which was on infrastructure as code in terms of, or no, it was source control, wasn't it? Yeah, it was Git and GitHub, basically.
Yeah.
And then the next 5 are each going to go into a particular subsystem. I'm using Azure, but as I said at the beginning, once you get under the surface, the major cloud providers are really all about the same in terms of what you're delivering. So we'll be looking at, for instance, storage during one. Another one is on, I think, deployments, infrastructure as code specifically. Networking, that's obviously front and center. But the emphasis here is we're not doing like going according to a certification exam blueprint. It's 100% practical stuff that you may be able to put into practice in your job immediately. And that, to me, as an instructor, it means so much to me. In fact, one of my favorite memories in my career is I was teaching, I think, Wireshark at a tech conference. This is a number of years ago. And I was walking around as I was presenting, and there were some people VPN'd back to Corp, and they were transmitting what I was teaching to their team right then so they could put it, they needed that information, like just-in-time learning. That's a beautiful thing. And that's what these I&E boot camps are all about, just pure practical skill development and experience. And I submit that if you are in that experimentation stage, trying things on, this would be something to check out for sure.
Sweet. We'll put the link out after this as well, Robin, right? Over to the I&E site.
Absolutely.
Not just plugging the show, but literally, the value add and the hands-on experience. Like I said, it was very one-dimensional when me and Robin were probably doing this, right? Back in the day now, Robin, because we're reaching a certain age. But it's good. It's gonna have that interactive learning experience now.
Yeah, back in the days it was just books, and then you got Pluralsight, right? And then it took off for me at least. So, all right, yeah. Well, we got a lot more topics. We don't have a lot more time. I don't want to rush into certain things, so maybe we can continue this in another episode if both of the gentlemen are in for it tomorrow. No, joking. So, Kev, do you want to do the outro? Because we still have some stuff.
Yeah,
or at least a question.
I suppose we're going to ask this to everybody that comes on the show. We'll start off with you, Tim. I mean, we've got a lot of advice today, but what is the best single piece of career or learning advice that you've ever had, and you'd like to tell folks?
When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, my grandfather said, "Timmy, if you can find work where you would do it even if you weren't getting paid for it, then you've found the right career for you." I knew that was really sage wisdom. I couldn't really absorb it because I was too young. I wasn't even old enough to have my first paper route, but that's kept me in good stead all the way to this very moment.
Sweet.
Oh, I have to applaud for that one.
Yeah. Grandfathers, they never normally get it wrong, right? Because they've got that much experience at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They failed fast over about, over a long period of time.
So true.
Sweet.
I've got
What about
plenty
you,
to
Mike?
drop on. Yeah, and so I'll share mine. I'm going to share one because I have several, right? So I got a piece of advice halfway through my career, which was don't be a one-trick pony. And that worked out really good for me because if I hadn't taken that advice, I probably would have focused too narrowly on what I was doing, and I would never got to this point. And I was following my passions, right? So that advice helped me not pigeonhole myself and really chase my interests, which involved programming. And for a long time, I was like, I can't program. I'm a systems engineer. So anyway, don't be a one-trick pony. Feel free to experiment and chase your passions.
Awesome.
Nice. I'll hit the button for you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Again, thanks for making time. This show is all about, as I said before, it's like sending the elevator back down. So we're trying to give people as much exposure, right, getting into those tech careers and those cloud careers as much as possible. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell icon. That is the first time I've ever said that. It feels surreal, but yeah. If you do like what you see, please, because it helps the channel out. But yeah, if you need to find Mike, Tim, me, or Robin, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn. I mean, Mike's everywhere, right? You can't seem to hide from him, right? He's got the marketing game down, right? But just reach out and connect because we're all approachable, right? Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
So
you guys.
what do we have? We have one more announcement. Next week we have a technical session coming up with the infamous Jack Tracy. He's going to do some bicep and some Azure landing zone. So if you're interested, please join us. Tim, Mike, thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. See ya.
Take care.